Well, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do to follow the leader of the opposition and probably the future Premier, but I'll do my best. Good morning, delegates. I'd like to just begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I want to acknowledge the PSA's Aboriginal Council, its chair, Sean Bremer, and pay special tribute to the work of Anne Weldon in organising our inaugural Aboriginal conference held yesterday. Delegates, it's a source of great pride for this union. And I'd also like to thank former General Secretary Maury O'Sullivan for addressing the conference yesterday. Delegates, welcome. You're all amongst friends here. We all share a common purpose, which is of course advancing the interests of the PSA members. If this is your first conference, I really hope that you leave with a renewed sense of vigour and purpose. I should also warn you, if it's your first conference, our Assistant General Secretary, who's not here at the moment, he does have an appalling sense of humour. I recommend you avoid him at all costs, particularly on the topic of football. And tonight, delegates, as well, if you saw anything last night, both our President, Kyle, and our Senior Vice President should be avoided, because you will end up on the dance floor, and you will no doubt, you may well end up in with an injury, but hopefully not. Now, if this is not your first conference, obviously I want this to be your best conference. Certainly we've been very fortunate to have a speaker like Luke Foley and to set out the type of government that he will lead going forward. Later this morning we'll have Sally McManus, Secretary of the ACTU, who'll be speaking to you this morning about the critical need to change the rules. And that's why we've got Fight for Change as our slogan this year. You'll hear from a couple of workers who I met this morning who've been on strike for over 12 months for MESO, and you'll hear about the type of unjust and unfair laws that are being pitted against workers. Mark Morey, the Secretary of Unions New South Wales, will join us at dinner this evening. We have many other guests and sponsors who'll be able to engage with you. But delegates, your union has been very busy this last 12 months. We've restructured and we've got our house in order. As a result of that, the PSA, as of around last week, is now growing. We are now growing in membership. Can I say, that's because as a union, we stand up and we fight for our members. This year, the union received around 31,000 external calls, and that's over 100 calls a day. PSA dealt with just under 7,500 matters that were raised through our member service centre. We've lodged 155 industrial disputes in the Industrial Relations Commission, 155. We've taken 40 unfair dismissals to the Industrial Relations Commission. We've successfully defended our members in the local court, in inquests and in the Supreme Court, and delegates, we are winning. I have to speak to you delegates now about the absolute need to stand up and fight back against both the federal and state government. We must fight to win, we must fight for change. And there's a reason that we have so much disputation, those figures that we spoke about earlier. The current Conservative government, led by Gladys Berejiklian, it's a government without foundation. It's a government without soul. It's a government without heart, without conviction. When we look at its more recent decision to knock down stadiums, move the Powerhouse Museum, it is a government without a brain. At last count, over, and you heard it earlier, over $50 billion in public sector assets and jobs have been privatised by this government in the last 7 years. And that doesn't include knocking down the stadiums or the powerhouse fiasco, and it doesn't include the assets associated with disability services. So when we talk about changing the rules, as far as I'm concerned, that has to include changing the rules on privatisation. That rule must be that no public asset or job can be privatised without a clear mandate from the people of New South Wales. That means, it's a novel concept, isn't it? That means you tell the public before you go to an election, in very clear terms, what it is you intend to do. You know, in terms of the PSA membership, we can look at what this government have flogged off with no mandate. Disability services, TAFE, out of home care and facts, land titles office, and the new Grafton prison, to name a few, and it has to stop. If we look at the example of disability services, the public sector historically operated around 40% of the state's group homes. That was the safety net, despite having the biggest economy and the most capacity to pay. At this point in time, and it may change, New South Wales is the only state in the country that does not have a public sector safety net for the most disadvantaged people in our community. As a result, people that should be in a group home, if they are very lucky, end up in a public hospital. And if not, they can end up in jail or they can end up in the streets. In many respects, it's just as bad in child protection. On top of the child story software fiasco, we've seen a child protection service shoveled out to the NGO sector with catastrophic failure.
Absolutely.
When we talk about changing the rules, we must also talk about workers' compensation. We have some of the highest risk employees in the workforce. If you are injured through no fault of your own, your pay drops by 5%, then 20%, and then you can look forward to a life on the statutory rate and paying your medical expenses. A fair and independent umpire, and again, what a novel concept in New South Wales. The Industrial Relations Commission must be restored. The ability of the IRC to hear work value cases must be restored. The Government Sector Employment Act, the GSE, and its outrageous regulation must go. It's our members that work in school education. They've been discriminated against and paid less simply because they work in a female-dominated industry. But the PSA is standing up for our members. The pay equity case in the Industrial Relations Commission continues. Earlier this year, our members in corrective services took statewide industrial action. This action was taken as a response to proposed job cuts to Long Bay and Goulburn. The widespread anger that leads to a statewide stoppage was caused by the complete arrogance of this government, trying to cut jobs in a prison system that is full to the brim. At the moment, there are over 14,000 inmates in a system that is designed and built to house 11,000 inmates. As a result of the action, the magnificent action that our members took, and now through the assistance of the Industrial Commission, we've begun to restore some of those positions. The government have actually come to the table, had a listen, and already, I think, even at Long Bay and elsewhere, we've pulled back many, many jobs. And also, delegates, can I say, the powers of the Industrial Court, they have to be returned to the Industrial Relations Commission. Last year, we were dragged before the Supreme Court of New South Wales and threatened with an injunction. The bosses sought individual action against Troy and myself as officers of this union. Of course, when that failed, then they sought to take injunction against the actual union. When that failed, they sought and they received an $84,000 fine against this union, an $85,000 fine. Now, delegates, that was our members in disabilities taking industrial action over a 12-hour period. Right? You had about 1,000 members engaging in industrial action. We were taken by Berejiklian down to the Supreme Court and belted with this fine. At the time, the judge hearing it, I won't repeat his name because he might pull me down there, he said that fine and his ability to fine us was manifestly inadequate. In other words, if he had the ability, he would have hit us with a much, much larger fine. And keep this into perspective. The previous record in New South Wales when the Industrial Court was in the Industrial Relations Commission was $12,000 that the teachers were fined for taking 3 days of industrial action. That's what it used to be. But under the new regime, obviously being sought by Berejiklian and her cohorts, they are seeking to try and fine us into oblivion. In the same way at the federal jurisdiction, they're trying to fine unions like the CPSU who do nothing but stand up for the safety of their members. So, delegates, it is critical, again, that we change the rules and we get that rule changed. We get those powers put back into the Industrial Relations Commission where it belongs.
Absolutely.
And delegates, when you hear us talking about changing the rules here in New South Wales, it means much more than what is happening in the federal system. But of course, the fight must start there. It's the insecure work practices in the federal system that were forced on us here in New South Wales. And quite frankly, in my view, the system of enterprise bargaining, it's run its race. It's run its race. And you'll hear more about that later. The unjust federal laws that allow unions like the CPSU to be fined over $10 million must be repealed. If we defeat unjust laws federally, we have a much better chance of defeating them here in New South Wales. So delegates, we must fight for change. We must change the rules. We must change the decision makers. Federally, we are unclear on when an election is likely to be held. Thankfully, Sally McManus and the ACTU have Turnbull well and truly on the hop. But here in New South Wales, next March, we have an opportunity to do just that. We can hold Berejiklian and Baird and O'Farrell to account for the damage they've done to the public sector here in New South Wales. We can campaign again against this unfair, unjust government. Along with the Teachers Federation, we've already commenced planning to go out into every marginal seat and talk about TAFE. We must talk about the 6,000 job cuts and demolition of this once great institution. Talk about the de-skilling of New South Wales, the outrageous the outrageous use of 1.4 million 457 or temporary work visas. 1 in 10 jobs are now held by a temporary work visa, and yet youth unemployment hovers at 20% in many regional communities. And when I talk about the temporary work visas, and Sally will talk about it, it's no way about attacking those people. It's through no fault of their own. But you've got bosses out there absolutely exploiting that loophole and bringing people in simply with the purpose of undercutting local salaries. And it has to stop. Delegates, we will continue to hold John Barilaro to account for turning his back on regional jobs. And we spoke about this yesterday. He's turned his back on regional New South Wales as the head of the National Party. He's stood by while over 2,381 jobs in his own electorate have either been privatised or cut. That's the leader, that's the person standing shoulder to shoulder with Gladys Berejiklian. That's what he's done. And of course he's remained silent while Berejiklian and Perrottet have cut and privatised over 12,500 jobs across regional New South Wales. Delegates, we will be campaigning in every marginal seat in this state. But delegates, we need you. When the call goes out, we need you to answer. Whether it's attending a protest or a rally, or handing out flyers, or simply having a conversation. We need everyone in this room to stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight. Because delegates, I can tell you, we are going after Gladys Berejiklian for privatising our jobs and cutting our jobs. And we will fight for change and we'll fight to win. Thank you, delegates.